Chapter 1, The Call. Drew Harmon barely heard the city outside his office window anymore. The low, distant hum of traffic 30 floors below had become background noise, like the steady breathing of a building that never truly slept. His world, at least for the moment, was confined to the wide, drafting table in front of him and the glowing monitors mounted above it. Steel, glass, low distribution sight lines. He leaned forward, forearms resting on the edge of the table, eyes scanning the digital blueprint of the Riverside Cultural Pavilion. Every line had to be right. Every angle mattered. Drew had learned long ago that buildings forgave nothing. A miscalculation left no room for excuses. Drew, his assistant Marcus, said from the doorway, clipboard tucked under his arm. The zoning board moved the meeting up to Thursday. They want revised elevations. Drew didn't look up. I'll have them by tomorrow morning. Marcus hesitated. Tomorrow morning? Yes. A beat of silence passed before Marcus nodded and backed out. He learned not to argue when Drew spoke like that. Calm, precise, final. Drew straightened, rolling his shoulders, and reached for his coffee. It was cold. He grimaced faintly but drank it anyway, eyes returning to the screen. The pavilion mattered. It wasn't just another project. It was the kind of commission that defined careers, the kind that would outlast him. His phone buzzed once against the wood of the drafting table. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. Drew sighed, irritation prickling beneath his concentration. He glanced down, expecting an email alert or another reminder notification. Instead, he saw Vanessa's name lighting up the screen. He frowned. Vanessa never called him at work. Not like this. If she needed something, she texted. If it was important, she waited until lunch. They had fallen into that rhythm without ever discussing it. Two parallel lives sharing the same house. Careful not to collide. The phone buzzed a fourth time. Drew picked it up. Vanessa, he said, already standing. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Too loud. Too close to the microphone. Drew, her voice cracked. You need to come home. Now. His brow furrowed. What's wrong? I can't. She exhaled shakily, words tumbling over each other. Just come home. Please. You have to come home right now. Drew glanced automatically at the clock on the wall. 2:17 p.m. Vanessa, he said, lowering his voice. Slow down. What happened? Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. Drew, please. Her breathing was uneven, frantic. I need you here. Something cold slid into his stomach. Is Lily okay? He asked. A pause. Too long. She's here, Vanessa said quickly. She's fine. She's just Drew. Please don't ask questions. Just come home. Drew's grip tightened around the phone. He scanned his office without really seeing it. The models on the shelves, the awards on the wall, the clean, controlled order of a space he understood completely. Vanessa, he said carefully, tell me what's going on. I can't, she whispered. I can't talk about it on the phone. Just come home. Now. The word now wasn't a request. It was a plea edged with panic. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Drew said. Please hurry, she said, and then the line went dead. Drew stared at the dark screen for a moment longer than necessary. Vanessa had always been composed. Anxious, yes, she worried about small things, rehearsed conversations in advance, avoided confrontation, but panic like that? Raw, uncontrolled fear? It didn't fit. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and headed for the door. Marcus looked up from his desk as Drew passed. Everything okay? Family emergency, Drew said. Cancel the rest of my meetings. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Got it. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Drew watched the numbers descend, his reflection faint in the mirrored walls. He loosened his tie, suddenly aware of how tight it felt around his neck. Vanessa's voice replayed in his head. You need to come home. Now. The parking garage smelled of oil and concrete. Drew got into his car and started the engine, pulling out faster than he normally would. He merged into traffic, fingers tapping once against the steering wheel before stilling. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the past few months. The silences at dinner. Vanessa staring at her phone, smiling at messages she didn't explain. The way she'd started going out more, errands that took hours, gym sessions that ran late. And Lily, quieter than usual, guarded. Drew had noticed. Of course he had. He noticed everything. But he told himself it was stress. Teenage moods. Growing distance that came with time. Buildings aged. So did marriages. Traffic thickened near the bridge. Drew leaned forward, jaw tightening as he switched lanes. He didn't like not knowing. Uncertainty was a flaw in a design, a weakness waiting to be exploited. His phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. Vanessa. He answered immediately. I'm on my way. I know, she said, breathless. I needed to hear you. What's happening? He pressed. I can't say, she repeated, almost sobbing now. Just don't be mad when you see it. See what? Silence. Vanessa. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. The call ended. Drew felt his pulse hammer in his ears. He tightened his grip on the wheel, knuckles whitening as he accelerated through a yellow light just before it turned red. Don't be mad when you see it. See what? The house came into view sooner than he expected, its clean lines and sharp angles standing out against the neighboring homes. Drew had designed it himself years ago, every window intentional, every corridor purposeful. And then he saw the police cars. Red and blue lights flashed against the white stone facade, washing the house in violent color. 2 cruisers blocked the driveway. Another sat across the street. Neighbors clustered in small groups, whispering, staring. Drew slowed, heart pounding now, confusion giving way to dread. He pulled over abruptly and got out of the car. Sir, an officer called out as Drew approached. You can't, I live here, Drew said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting inside him. That's my house. The officer hesitated, then nodded and gestured him forward. Before Drew could take another step, a figure broke away from the crowd. Dad! Lily ran toward him, her face pale, eyes wide and glassy. She slammed into his chest, arms wrapping around him tightly. Lily, Drew said, instinctively holding her. What's going on? She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her hands gripping his jacket like she was afraid he might disappear. Dad, she whispered urgently, her voice trembling, don't go inside. Drew frowned. What do you mean? She shook her head, tears spilling over now. Please, Mom doesn't want you to see. Drew looked past her at the front door of the house he had designed, built, trusted. A chill settled deep in his bones. I have to, he said softly, already stepping around her, and with that unshakable sense of unease tightening in his chest. Drew Harmon moved toward his home, certain, without yet knowing why, that something in his life had irreversibly broken. Chapter 2, The House of Blood. The flashing lights hurt Drew's eyes. Red, blue, red again, strobing across the clean, white stone of his house, turning it into something unfamiliar, something hostile. The home he had designed with such deliberate restraint now looked like a crime scene, because it was one. He stepped past the patrol car, blocking the driveway, barely registering the officer, speaking into a radio. The murmur of voices from the sidewalk rose and fell. Neighbors gathered in loose knots, hands over mouths, eyes bright with curiosity and fear. Dad! Lily broke free from the cluster of people near the curb and ran toward him. She collided with his chest, clutching him as if the ground might give way beneath her feet. Hey, Drew said automatically, arms coming around her. She was shaking, not crying yet, just trembling like her body hadn't decided what to do with the shock. Lily, what happened? She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her face was pale, freckles standing out sharply against skin drained of color. Her eyes were red, unfocused. Don't go inside, she said quickly, her words tumbling over one another. Please, Dad, just don't. Drew frowned, confusion hardening into something colder. Why wouldn't I go inside? She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. Mom doesn't want you to see. She told me. She said you shouldn't. Lily, Drew said, gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. I need you to tell me what's going on. She swallowed hard, glanced toward the front door, then back at him. There's blood, she whispered. There's so much blood. Drew felt his chest tighten. An officer approached, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a notepad tucked under his arm. Sir, are you Drew Harmon? Yes, Drew said without looking away from Lily. I'm Officer Ramirez. We just need you to— I'm going inside. Drew interrupted. The officer hesitated. Sir, the scene is still. It's my house, Drew said, his voice low but immovable. And my wife is inside. Another officer appeared near the doorway, exchanging a look with Ramirez. After a brief pause, Ramirez nodded. All right, but stay with me. Drew gently moved Lily aside. Stay here, he told her. I'll be right back. No, she said, clutching his arm. Dad, please, I need to see, he said softly. He stepped past her before she could argue again. The front door was open. That alone felt wrong. Vanessa was meticulous about locking up, always checking twice, sometimes 3 times. Drew paused on the threshold, taking in a smell before anything else. Metallic. Sharp. Blood. Inside, the house looked broken. The pristine white walls of the entryway were streaked with dark red splatter, some of it dried, some of it still glistening under the harsh lights set up by the police. The abstract painting Vanessa had insisted on hanging near the stairs was crooked, its frame smeared. A vase lay shattered on the floor, water and flowers crushed beneath heavy boots. Drew took one step inside, then another. Jesus, someone muttered behind him. His shoes stuck slightly to the hardwood floor. He looked down. Blood pooled near the center of the living room, spreading outward like a grotesque shadow. And there, lying motionless on the floor, was a man Drew had never seen before. The man's eyes were open, staring at nothing. One arm was twisted at an unnatural angle. A dark stain soaked through his shirt, spreading across his chest. Drew stopped breathing. Sir, Officer Ramirez said quietly, I need you to— What happened? Drew asked. His voice sounded distant to his own ears, like it belonged to someone else. From the far end of the room, Vanessa emerged. She looked small, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't hers, gray, official-looking, likely from the back of a patrol car. Her hair was disheveled. Makeup streaked down her cheeks. She froze when she saw Drew. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vanessa let out a broken sound and crossed the room quickly, stopping just short of him. Oh my God, she said, her voice shaking. Drew. He searched her face, cataloging every detail without meaning to, the way her hands trembled, the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes, the faint smear of blood on the sleeve of her sweater. What happened? He asked again, this time looking directly at her. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear I didn't. Drew glanced past her, back to the body on the floor. Who is that? I don't know, Vanessa said quickly. Too quickly. I've never seen him before. Officer Ramirez cleared his throat. Mrs. Harmon has given a preliminary statement. She says the man broke in. Drew turned back to Vanessa. A break-in. She nodded rapidly. I heard a noise downstairs. I thought it was you coming home early, but then I saw him. He was already inside. He had knifed Drew. I was so scared. Her words came out rehearsed, breathless. What did you do? Drew asked. She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. I grabbed the fireplace poker. I told him to leave. He came toward me. Her voice cracked. I didn't know what else to do. Drew followed her gaze. A metal poker lay near the body, its end darkened with blood. You killed him? Drew asked quietly. Vanessa flinched at the word. I defended myself, she said. I didn't have a choice. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in despite the open floor plan Drew had once been so proud of. He looked again at the splatter patterns on the walls, the overturned furniture, the stillness of the man on the floor. This was his house, his design, his space, and now it was soaked in blood. Officer Ramirez stepped closer. Sir, I know this is a shock. We'll need to ask you a few questions later, but right now, Drew raised a hand slightly, cutting him off without looking away from Vanessa. You're saying he broke in, Drew said slowly, and you killed him in self-defense. Vanessa nodded, her lips pressed together as if holding herself together took all her strength. Yes, she whispered. That's what happened. Drew stood there, surrounded by flashing lights and strangers in blood, staring at the woman he had built a life with, his home forever changed, his certainty fractured, as her words hung in the air. Vanessa claims she killed an intruder in self-defense. Chapter 3. A clean verdict. The house no longer felt like his. By the time dawn broke, Drew had lost track of how many people had walked through it. Uniforms, plainclothes officers, forensic techs in blue gloves and shoe covers. The lights were brighter than usual, harsher, illuminating every corner without mercy. His living room had been stripped of warmth and reduced to evidence. Drew sat at the long dining table, hands folded, answering questions in a steady voice. Officer Ramirez remained nearby, occasionally glancing at a tablet, while another detective, tall, graying, with a voice that carried authority without effort, took notes. "Mr. Harmon," the detective said, "how long were you at work yesterday?" "Until my wife called," Drew replied. "A little after 2. Did you notice anything unusual before you left? Any threats? Any strange calls? Anyone following you?" "No," the detective nodded, jotting something down. "And you never met the deceased before today?" Drew shook his head. "Never." Across the room, Vanessa sat on the couch, wrapped again in that same gray blanket. She had been given tea she hadn't touched. Her posture was composed now, shoulders squared, breathing even. Every so often, she dabbed at her eyes, but the sobbing had stopped hours ago. Too clean, Drew thought. An officer approached the detective and murmured something under his breath. The detective listened, nodded once, then turned back to Drew. "We've identified the man," he said. "Name's Quentin Doyle." The name meant nothing to Drew. Prior record, the detective continued. Assault, armed robbery, possession. Did time. Recently released. Drew glanced toward the body bag being zipped near the doorway. "So he was a criminal." "Yes," the detective said. "Based on everything we've gathered so far, it appears he broke into your home and confronted your wife." Vanessa looked up sharply at that, eyes wide again, playing the role. "She was alone," the detective added. "She defended herself." The words landed softly, deliberately. "Self-defense," Drew repeated. "That's correct," the detective said. "From what we can tell, Mrs. Harmon acted reasonably under the circumstances." An hour later, the official phrasing changed. Justifiable homicide. Drew stood near the kitchen island as Officer Ramirez explained it, his tone almost reassuring. "Mr. Harmon, I know this has been overwhelming, but based on the evidence, your wife isn't facing charges. The intruder had a history, and there are no indications of wrongdoing on her part." Vanessa let out a shaky breath, as if she'd been holding it for hours. Drew nodded slowly. "So that's it, for the most part," Ramirez said. "There'll be paperwork, follow-ups, but this won't go any further." Another officer clapped Drew lightly on the shoulder. "She did what she had to do," he said. "Not everyone has that kind of courage." Courage. Drew watched Vanessa's reaction. She didn't flinch at the praise. She didn't recoil from the word killed. Instead, she lowered her gaze modestly, lips pressed together, as if accepting an award she hadn't asked for. That was the first flaw. The house began to empty as the morning wore on. Evidence bags were sealed. Photos were taken one last time. The body was removed. With each departure, the space felt less chaotic and more exposed. Drew walked through the living room slowly once the officers stepped outside to confer. He moved like he was surveying a construction site, eyes scanning, mind assembling. There was no broken lock. He crouched near the front door, examining the frame. No splintering, no prime marks. The security panel beside the door was intact, untouched. He straightened and walked toward the back hallway. The window there was closed, locked, the glass unbroken. Vanessa had said the man broke in. Drew moved into the kitchen. A chair was overturned, its legs smeared with blood. The refrigerator door stood open, humming softly. He stared at it for a moment. "Why would an intruder go to the fridge?" he asked quietly. Vanessa stiffened behind him. "What?" "The fridge," Drew said, pointing. "Why would he open it?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second. I don't know. Maybe he was looking for something." Drew nodded, as if accepting that explanation, but his eyes lingered on the countertop. The knife block was full, all the knives accounted for. The poker lay where the police had placed it back down after bagging and re-examining it. Drew studied the angle it had been dropped at, the direction of the blood spatter along the wall. Too uniform. Too controlled. Blood splatter told a story. Drew knew patterns, force, direction, intent. This wasn't the wild chaos of a desperate struggle. It was contained, directed, designed. He felt a quiet pressure building behind his ribs. Vanessa moved closer, her blanket dragging softly across the floor. "They said it's over," she said, voice low. "You heard them." "I heard them," Drew replied. She reached for his arm. He let her touch him. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die." Drew looked down at her hand, gripping his sleeve. It wasn't shaking. He gently covered her fingers with his own. "I'm glad you're safe." Her shoulders sagged in relief. "You don't hate me?" The question was almost rehearsed. "No," Drew said after a measured pause. "Of course not." Her eyes searched his face, looking for something, confirmation, forgiveness, absolution. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. She leaned into him, resting her forehead briefly against his chest. "I didn't want you to see it like that," she murmured. "I didn't want you to see me like that." Drew stared over her shoulder at the wall, where the blood had been wiped but not erased. A faint shadow remained, staining the paint. "I know," he said. Outside, an officer knocked lightly and poked his head in. "Mr. Harmon, we're all set. You're free to stay here tonight if you want, but you might consider getting a hotel." Drew nodded. "Thank you." When the door finally closed behind the last uniform, the house fell silent. Vanessa exhaled deeply, as if the weight of the night had finally lifted. She sank onto the couch, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "It's over," she said. Drew remained standing, eyes drifting once more over the room, over the intact locks, the stage disorder, the careful way fear had been presented and then withdrawn. The police had reached their conclusion quickly, too quickly, and as Drew Harmon stood in the home he had designed line by line, surrounded by answers that fit too neatly together, he understood one thing with absolute clarity. The verdict was clean, but the design was flawed. Chapter 4, The First Crack. The house was too quiet. Drew noticed it as soon as night settled in, not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping home, but the brittle kind where every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog down the street, the soft tick of the wall clock he'd installed himself years ago, chosen for its clean design and near-silent movement. Near-silent was no longer silent enough. Vanessa lay on the couch, still wrapped in the blanket, her head turned toward the television without really watching it. The volume was low, some late-night news program cycling through stories Drew didn't register. Lily had gone to a neighbor's house for the night at the insistence of the police and Vanessa. "She shouldn't be here," Vanessa had said quickly. "Not tonight." Drew hadn't argued. Now he stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug he hadn't used, watching the water spiral down the drain. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, older than he remembered, sharper around the eyes. "Drew," Vanessa said softly. He turned. "Yes." "Can you sit with me?" she asked. "I don't want to be alone." He crossed the room and sat in the armchair opposite her, leaving the coffee table between them. The distance felt deliberate, even if neither of them acknowledged it. Vanessa pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "The police said it might help to talk about normal things. To try to rest." "Rest," Drew repeated. She nodded. "I don't think I can sleep." "You should try," he said evenly. She studied his face, as if waiting for something more, comfort, reassurance, anger. When none came, she looked away. Minutes passed in silence. Drew let it stretch. Silence had a way of revealing more than questions ever did. Vanessa's phone buzzed on the cushion beside her. She flinched. It was subtle, but Drew saw it, the sharp inhale, the way her fingers moved too quickly to cover the screen. "It's probably Lily's friend's mom," she said too fast. "Just checking in." Drew nodded. "You should answer." Vanessa hesitated. Then she picked up the phone, glanced at the screen, and immediately locked it again. "I'll call her back later," she said. She set the phone face down on the couch. The movement was careless. Or maybe she thought he wasn't watching. Drew leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. The corner of the phone screen caught the light before it went dark. A name. Preston Walsh. Drew felt something shift inside him, Not a jolt, not a shock, but a slow, precise crack like stress fracturing concrete long before collapse. Preston Walsh was not a neighbor, not a parent from Lily's school, not family. Preston Walsh was his colleague, his hire, his recommendation to the board. Vanessa noticed Drew's stillness. "What?" she asked, her voice tight. "Nothing," Drew said. She watched him for another second, then looked away again, shoulders easing just a little. She reached for the remote and turned the television up a notch. The phone buzzed again. This time, Drew spoke before she could. "You should answer it." Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "It can wait." "It might be important," Drew said calmly. Vanessa swallowed. Slowly, she turned the phone over and picked it up. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Drew didn't look at her. He watched the reflection of her face in the dark TV screen instead. She unlocked the phone. The notification banner slid down briefly before she could stop it. "I can't stop thinking about you. Are you okay?" There was no mistaking the tone. No professional ambiguity. No plausible explanation that didn't require a lie. Vanessa froze. Drew exhaled quietly. "Who's Preston?" he asked. Her eyes snapped to his. For a split second, raw panic flashed across her face, real this time, unfiltered. Then it vanished, replaced by something smoother. "A friend," she said. "A friend who texts you that?" Drew asked. She looked down at the phone, then back up. "I didn't mean for you to see that. That wasn't my question." She shifted on the couch. "He's someone I talk to sometimes. That's all." Drew nodded once. "Does he work with me?" Her silence answered before she could. "Yes," she admitted. "But it's not." "Is he on the Riverside project?" Drew asked. She hesitated again. "Too long." "Yes." Drew leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. He felt strangely calm, as if his mind had switched into a familiar mode: assessment, analysis, structure. "How long?" he asked. Vanessa's voice softened. "Drew, today isn't the day for this." "I didn't ask for details," he said. "I asked for time." She looked away. "A few months." "A few months." During the same months, she'd stayed late. Gone quiet. Smiled at her phone. Drew nodded again, absorbing it. "I didn't plan for this to happen," Vanessa said quickly. "It just did. You've been distant. Always working. Always designing something. And that made this acceptable." Drew asked. She stood abruptly, blankets slipping to the floor. "I almost died today." He didn't raise his voice. "And that changes the truth." She pressed her lips together, eyes glistening. "I can't do this right now." She picked up her phone and walked toward the hallway. "Vanessa," Drew said. She stopped but didn't turn around. He looked at her back, at the familiar shape of the woman he had trusted for years. "Did Preston text you before I got home today?" Her shoulders tensed. "Yes," she said quietly. Drew closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, his voice was even. "You should try to sleep." She turned then, searching his face. "You're not going to say anything else?" "Not tonight," Drew said. She nodded slowly, as if relieved, and disappeared down the hall. Drew remained where he was long after she was gone. Eventually, he stood and walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. He paused in the living room, staring at the faint discoloration on the wall where blood had soaked into paint that would never be truly clean. He passed the front door, the intact lock. He passed the kitchen, the untouched knives. He passed the couch where Vanessa's phone now lay charging, screen dark, secrets hidden beneath glass and code. For the first time, Drew allowed the thought to fully form. Not as fear, not as anger, but as understanding. The house, the marriage, the life he thought he had built, they were all standing. But somewhere beneath the surface, the foundation had cracked. And Drew Harmon realized, with chilling clarity, that everything he trusted might have been constructed on lies. Chapter 5, Blueprints of Betrayal. Drew did not sleep. He lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling he had once chosen for its clean symmetry, counting breaths that never settled into rest. Vanessa's side of the bed remained empty. She had fallen asleep on the couch sometime before midnight, exhaustion finally overtaking performance. Drew had listened to her breathing slow from across the hall, steady and even, while his own thoughts refused to quiet. By morning, he had made a decision. Silence. That was the first rule. No confrontations. No accusations. Structures didn't collapse from a single blow. They failed when pressure was applied in the right places, slowly, methodically. Drew showered, dressed, and kissed Vanessa on the forehead as if nothing had changed. She stirred, murmured something incoherent, and turned her face into the pillow. He watched her for a moment longer than necessary, then left for work. But he didn't go to the office. Instead, Drew parked 2 blocks away, sat in his car, and opened his laptop. Vanessa had always underestimated him in one crucial way. She believed his intelligence belonged only to buildings. She forgot that design was about systems, how things connected, how forces moved, how failures hid until they didn't. He started with the obvious. Phone records. The family plan gave him access to billing summaries. Drew scrolled slowly, carefully, noting patterns. A number appeared again and again, late nights, early mornings, long calls bracketed by short, rapid exchanges. He copied the number and searched it. Preston Walsh. Drew closed his eyes briefly. Next came email. Vanessa rarely logged out of the shared laptop at home. She didn't think she needed to. Drew accessed the browser history, filtering dates, watching the timeline assemble itself like a blueprint emerging from tracing paper. Private email accounts, temporary addresses, password resets, encrypted messaging apps. His jaw tightened, not in anger but recognition. He knew enough about digital security to understand what it took to hide conversations deliberately. This wasn't careless. This was intentional. He downloaded everything. That evening, after dinner eaten in strained politeness, Drew waited until Vanessa went to shower. He sat at the dining table, her laptop open in front of him, his own beside it, cross-referencing data. The messages were worse than he expected. I miss you. I hate pretending when he's right there. Soon. We just need to be careful. There were photos too. Not explicit, but intimate, familiar angles, private smiles. A hand on a thigh. A reflection in a mirror Drew recognized from a hotel near Preston's office. Drew felt something cold settle behind his sternum. He didn't stop. He followed the trail where it led next. Finances. Vanessa handled household expenses. Drew trusted her with it, the way he trusted his own calculations, assuming competence, honesty, balance. He logged into their accounts. At first glance, everything looked normal. Bills paid. Savings intact. Then he noticed the rounding. Small transfers spread across months. Amounts just under the threshold that triggered alerts. Funds moved from joint accounts into an account under Vanessa's name alone. Then out again, to a shell company. Drew copied the name and searched corporate registries. The company existed. Barely. No real operations. No public footprint. But the registered agent listed a familiar firm. Preston Walsh's consulting group. Drew leaned back in his chair, breath slow and measured. So this wasn't just an affair. It was coordination. He pulled up the timeline and began aligning events, dates of transfers, hotel stays, late-night calls. Patterns emerged. Rhythms. Intent. The architect in him recognized the shape of it before his mind fully accepted the meaning. Money moved in advance of something. Preparation. He closed the laptop and stared at the dark window, his reflection superimposed over the house behind him. Lily's room was down the hall. Her door was closed. Safe. Unaware. For now. The next piece took longer. Quentin Doyle. Drew returned to the police report he'd been given, brief, sanitized. Name. Age. Prior convictions. He searched deeper. Court records. Employment histories. Old addresses. It took hours. Then, finally, a connection surfaced. A construction subcontractor Preston had once hired for a short-term redevelopment project in another state. The name was buried in an old invoice, misspelled slightly, paid through an intermediary. Quentin Doyle. Drew felt his pulse quicken, not panic, but clarity snapping into place. He followed that thread next. Doyle had bounced between jobs. Cash-heavy work. Temporary contracts. He'd been arrested twice during periods when Preston's firm had active developments in the same regions. Coincidence, perhaps. Once might be chance. Twice might be luck. 3 times was design. Drew opened a new document and began mapping it out. Names, Dates, money flows, communications. Lines connected points, forming a structure that made terrible sense. The break-in. The timing. Vanessa's fear, real enough to convince police, controlled enough to pass scrutiny. Doyle hadn't come at random. He'd been invited. Or sent. Drew closed the file and sat back, hands steepled, eyes unfocused. He replayed the scene in the living room, the lack of forced entry, the stage chaos, the poker placed just so. He remembered Vanessa's oddly steady hands. Her rehearsed words. Doyle hadn't been there to rob them. He'd been there for something else. Something planned. Drew felt a slow, deliberate tightening in his chest as the final realization settled. Not his rage, not his grief, but his pure, undeniable understanding. This wasn't a betrayal born of weakness or loneliness. It was a project, and like any project, it had a goal. Drew Harmon hadn't just been lied to. He had been designed out of his own life. The affair, the money, the man on the floor. They weren't separate failures. They were components. And as Drew sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the blueprint of deceit he had uncovered with his own hands, one truth stood unshakably clear. The break-in was no accident. And he wasn't just betrayed, he was targeted. Chapter 6, Designing the Counterstructure. Drew chose the cafe because it had bad acoustics. Steam hissed constantly from the espresso machine. Dishes clinked. Conversations overlapped in uneven waves, blurring into a steady roar that swallowed sharp words before they could travel. It was the kind of place where nothing stayed isolated long enough to be overheard. Malene Russo arrived exactly on time. She didn't look like a private investigator. No trench coat, no badge flashed for effect. She wore a dark blazer over a plain shirt, her hair pulled back tightly, her movements economical. She scanned the room once, spotted Drew, and walked over without hesitation. "Mr. Harmon," she said, extending a hand. "You said this was urgent." Drew stood and shook it. Her grip was firm, assessing. "Thank you for coming." She sat across from him, placing a thin leather folder on the table, but not opening it. "You were referred by Judge Calder," she said. "That buys you about 10 minutes of my trust. Use them well." Drew slid a flash drive across the table. "I believe my wife and my colleague conspired to have me killed." Malene didn't react. Not visibly. She simply picked up the flash drive, turned it over once, and set it beside her coffee. "That's a serious claim," she said. "People don't usually lead with it unless they're right or very wrong." "I'm an architect," Drew replied. "I don't guess." Something like interest flickered in her eyes. "Start from the beginning," she said. Drew did. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. He laid it out like a report, timelines, transactions, messages, connections. He spoke of Quentin Doyle as a data point, not a corpse. He described the stage break-in, the lack of forced entry, the controlled blood patterns. He mentioned Preston Walsh's role in his firm, his access, his trust. Malene listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a small pad. When Drew finished, she leaned back slightly. "And what do you want from me?" "Confirmation," Drew said. "And visibility." She studied him for a long moment. "You're not asking for protection." "No, you're not asking me to go to the police." "Not yet." Malene nodded slowly. "Then I need access. Full access. Accounts, devices, schedules. And I don't work cheap." Drew met her gaze. "Neither do I." 2 days later, Malene called him from a secure line. "You were right," she said without preamble. Drew closed the door of his office and sat down. "About which part?" "All of it," she replied. "And the parts you didn't see yet." She explained it methodically. Quentin Doyle hadn't been hired to kill Drew that night, not directly. He'd been contracted to retrieve documents from Drew's home office. Contracts, design IP, insurance paperwork, proof of life coverage. But something went wrong, Malene said. "Your wife was there. Earlier than expected. There was an argument." Doyle panicked. She struck first. Drew's fingers curled slowly against the desk. "She wasn't supposed to kill him," Malene continued. "That wasn't the plan, which is why things got sloppy. He was a means, not the end." Drew exhaled once. And now, Malene said, "They're adapting." She sent files to a secure email. Drew opened them one by one. Encrypted chats between Vanessa and Preston. New names, new numbers, language that avoided specifics but reeked of intent. We can't use the same mistake again. This time it has to look clean. Insurance won't question it if the timing is right. Malene's voice came through again. They're looking for a replacement. Drew closed his eyes. How soon, he asked. Soon enough to be dangerous, she replied. They've already made contact with 2 intermediaries. One backed out. The other asked for more money. Drew stood and walked to the window, staring down at the city. Lines of traffic moved with predictable order. Systems within systems. Do they suspect me? He asked. No, Malene said. They think you're grieving. Disoriented. You're playing the part well. He turned back to his desk. Good. There was a pause on the line. You understand, Malene said carefully, that if you stay, this ends one of 2 ways. Yes, Drew replied. You could disappear, she continued. We could make that happen. New accounts. New identity. Lily included. Drew's jaw tightened at his daughter's name. No, he said. Then you could expose them now. Go public. Force an arrest. Too early. Malene was quiet for a moment. Then what are you planning? Drew thought his house. His blueprints. The way he designed load paths, so pressure traveled exactly where he intended. I'm not running, he said, and I'm not warning them. That leaves, I'm finishing it, Drew said calmly. On my terms. Malene let out a slow breath. You're talking about letting them proceed. I'm talking about control, Drew corrected. Every structure fails eventually. The question is whether it collapses randomly or exactly as designed. And you want to design theirs. Yes. She was silent again, then said, if we do this, there's no improvisation, no emotion. One mistake, and you don't get a second chance. Drew glanced at a framed photo on his desk. Lily at 12, missing 2 teeth, smiling without fear. I don't make mistakes, he said. Malene closed the folder on her end. Then we build a counterstructure. They discussed boundaries, rules, what Drew would and would not do, what she would monitor, what would be documented. Everything would be legal, observable, recorded. No crimes, Malene said firmly. If you cross that line, I walk. I won't, Drew said. I don't need to. When the call ended, Drew remained still, listening to the faint hum of the building around him. That night, he sat across from Vanessa at dinner, nodding at the right moments, smiling when expected. He let her talk, let her believe. In her phone, messages continued to flow. In the shadows, plans adjusted. And Drew Harmon, architect, husband, intended victim, understood his role with absolute clarity. He would not escape the design meant to destroy him. He would complete it, on his terms. Chapter 7, Playing the Part. Drew learned quickly that deception was easiest when it looked like weakness. He let his shoulders sag when he walked through the house. Let his voice soften, slow. He paused longer than necessary before answering questions, stared out windows as if the future were a blur instead of calculation. Vanessa watched him closely at first, suspicion flickering behind her concern, but when days passed without confrontation, her vigilance eased. He gave her what she expected to see. At breakfast one morning, Drew pushed his plate away untouched. I don't know how much longer I can stay here, he said quietly. Vanessa froze mid-sip of her coffee. The house. Everything, he replied. Every room feels wrong now. She nodded too quickly. That's normal. After what happened? I've been thinking about selling, Drew added, his gaze unfocused. Starting over somewhere else. Smaller. Quieter. Vanessa's eyes widened, then softened. If that's what you need. But Drew noticed the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around the mug. The house wasn't just a home, it was an asset, a stage, a variable she hadn't planned to lose so soon. Later that week, Drew mentioned the insurance. I called the agent today, he said casually as they sat on the couch. They want to review everything. Policies, beneficiaries, standard stuff. Vanessa swallowed. Why now? After a traumatic event like this, they recommend it, Drew said, shrugging. I barely listened, honestly. My head's not in it. He let the words hang there, beneficiaries, and watched her reaction from the corner of his eye. Her breath hitched just slightly. Of course, she said. Whatever they need. Drew nodded, as if reassured. At work, he played the role just as carefully. He canceled meetings, declined social invitations, told colleagues he needed time. Preston Walsh, however, didn't keep his distance. He checked in often, too often. "Hey, man," Preston said one afternoon, leaning against Drew's office doorway. "Just wanted to see how you're holding up." Drew looked up slowly, eyes tired. "Not great." Preston stepped inside, lowering his voice. "If you need help covering things here, I've got you." "I appreciate that," Drew said. "I don't know how long I'll be able to keep this up." Preston nodded. Sympathy etched across his face, but beneath it, Drew saw impatience. Restlessness, the mask slipping. That night, Vanessa paced the bedroom while Drew sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. "You've been so distant," she said. "I'm worried about you." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm exhausted, Vanessa. I can't sleep. I can't think. Sometimes I feel like I'm just floating." She sat beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "Maybe you should take a break. Travel. Clear your head." "Maybe," Drew said. "But with Lily, the house, the work, it all feels like too much." Vanessa leaned in, her voice low and careful. "We'll figure it out." He nodded, though his eyes stayed on the floor. Behind the scenes, Drew was anything but adrift. He met Malene Russo twice that week, always in different places. She updated him in clipped, precise language. Vanessa's messages were growing more urgent. Preston's tone had shifted, less romantic, more operational. "They're feeling the pressure," Malene said. "You're destabilizing their timeline." "Good," Drew replied. He made other calls too. A former client who now worked in the district attorney's office. A law professor he'd collaborated with on a civic project. A journalist he'd once helped secure an exclusive interview for a high-profile development. None of the conversations sounded dramatic. Drew didn't accuse. He asked questions, shared concerns, framed everything as hypothetical. "What happens," he asked one contact, "when a justifiable homicide turns out to have complications?" "What kind of complications?" came the cautious reply. "Financial, procedural, patterns that only emerge with time." The answer was always the same. "Keep records. Be patient." Drew smiled to himself. At dinner one evening, Vanessa's phone buzzed repeatedly. She tried to ignore it, but Drew noticed the tension creeping back in her posture. "You don't have to stay with me all night," he said gently. "If you need air, go meet a friend." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I'm fine. Just tired." She left within minutes. Drew watched her car pull out of the driveway, then calmly opened his laptop. Across town, Preston grew bolder. He started calling Drew directly instead of texting. Started suggesting shortcuts at work, pushing deadlines, proposing riskier design changes. "We can't afford delays," Preston said sharply during one meeting. "Not with the board watching." Drew rubbed his temples. "I trust your judgment." Preston blinked. "You do?" "Yes," Drew said. "I don't have the energy to micromanage anymore." The relief on Preston's face was immediate and dangerous. By the end of the month, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Vanessa watched Drew with a new kind of fear, one born not of suspicion, but of uncertainty. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confrontational. He was slipping away. And Preston, sensing opportunity, began to rush. Drew saw it all, cataloged every glance, every pause, every misstep. He was laying the groundwork carefully, reinforcing where needed, weakening where planned, aligning forces, distributing weight. Like any architect preparing a foundation, Drew Harmon made sure that when the time came, everything would fall exactly where it was meant to. Chapter 8, The Cabin. Drew learned about the cabin on a Wednesday afternoon, from a message that was never meant for him. He was sitting alone in his office, the blinds half closed against the late sun, when Malene Russo's name appeared on his secure phone. She didn't waste time on greetings. "They've set the location," she said. "Remote. Mountain property. Rented under a shell name." Drew leaned back in his chair. "Where?" She gave him the coordinates, then added, "It's a cabin. Isolated. No close neighbors. Spotty cell reception." Drew closed his eyes for a moment. He could already see it. Rough timber, narrow road, the kind of place marketed as peaceful and forgotten. Perfect for stories that didn't need witnesses. "And the purpose?" he asked. Malene exhaled softly. They're finalizing it. Timeline. Method. Cleanup. My suicide, Drew said. Yes. He didn't flinch. He had passed that moment weeks ago. How? He asked instead. Still discussing details, Malene replied. But the language is clear. It's meant to look voluntary. Depression. Stress. A man who couldn't recover. Drew pictured Vanessa's face when she spoke of his exhaustion, how easily the story had taken shape in her mouth. He nodded once. When? He asked. 2 days from now. Drew stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Cars moved like ants along rigid paths, every one of them following rules whether the drivers realized it or not. Good, he said. Malene paused. You're certain? Yes. That night, Drew played his part flawlessly. He came home late, shoulders slumped, tie loosened. Vanessa looked up from the kitchen table, concern etched carefully across her face. You look terrible, she said. He offered a tired smile. Feel worse. She stood and crossed the room, touching his arm. You shouldn't push yourself like this. I don't know how not to, Drew said. Everything feels heavy. Her eyes searched his, looking for cracks. Drew gave her exactly what she wanted to see, weariness without suspicion. You should get away for a few days, Vanessa said gently. Clear your head. Maybe, Drew replied. I just don't know where I'd even go. She hesitated, then said, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knows you. Drew nodded slowly, as if the idea frightened him. Maybe, he repeated. The next morning, Malene met him at a nondescript office building on the edge of town. No signage, no identifying marks. Inside, 2 men and a woman waited, plain clothes, serious expressions. Mr. Harmon, one of them said, extending a hand. Detective Alvarez, we've been briefed. Drew shook his hand. Thank you for doing this. Alvarez gestured to a table covered in maps and equipment. The cabin is off-grid, but not off our reach. We'll install audio and video. Discreet. No visible cameras. In jurisdiction? Drew asked. Covered, the woman said. Once they start discussing intent, it becomes actionable. Drew studied the map. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by dense forest. Will they suspect anything? He asked. No, Malene said. They believe you're unraveling, that you won't interfere. Drew nodded. I won't. Over the next 48 hours, he watched Vanessa and Preston move like people convinced time was finally on their side. Vanessa packed a small bag, claiming she needed space to think. Preston called Drew twice, both times feigning concern. You holding up? Preston asked during the second call. Barely, Drew admitted. I feel like I'm disappearing. Preston's voice softened. Sometimes that's the only way to survive. Drew almost smiled. The day of the meeting, rain fell lightly over the mountains, mist curling through the trees like smoke. The cabin sat quiet and unassuming, its porch slick with damp leaves. Inside, the surveillance equipment was already in place. Microphones hidden in light fixtures, cameras embedded behind vents and smoke detectors. Nothing visible, nothing obvious. Drew stood just outside the tree line, watching from a distance as Malene checked her watch. They're on schedule, she said. He nodded. I won't be nearby. She looked at him sharply. You don't need to see this. I know, Drew replied. That's the point. They shook hands once, brief, professional. Once they speak, Malene said, it's over. Drew turned away without another word. He drove back down a mountain, every mile creating distance not just from the cabin, but from the man he had once been. When he reached the city, he parked in a quiet garage and sat in his car, engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. He imagined them inside the cabin now. Vanessa pacing, Preston speaking too quickly, the hired man listening, calculating, words forming that could never be taken back. Plans layered on lies, layered on greed. Drew did nothing. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't warn. He allowed them space, allowed gravity to do its work. Because Drew Harmon understood something they never had. Structures don't need to be attacked to fail. If they're flawed at the core, all you have to do is let the weight settle. And so he waited, calm and deliberate, as the design meant to erase him finally turned inward, collapsing under its own weight. Chapter 9, The Reveal. The cabin smelled of pine and damp earth, but inside, tension hung heavier than any fragrance could mask. Vanessa paced near the small stone fireplace, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Preston leaned against the table, arms crossed, a map of Drew's property and a notebook open before him. Between them sat a man whose face Drew didn't know, a hitman hired under a pseudonym, his eyes darting, fingers twitching near the concealed weapon at his side. "We need to finalize tonight," Preston said, voice low but urgent. "Everything has to be timed. Insurance, alibis, the statement. If we misstep, even by a little—" He didn't finish the sentence. His meaning was clear. Vanessa nodded rapidly. I know. I thought about the sequence all night. Drew's schedule, his travel patterns, everything." Her fingers nervously twisted a strand of hair. "It has to look natural, convincing." The hitman shifted, glancing between them. "I'm ready. You give me the window, I do the job. No mistakes." His voice was calm but cold, practiced in precision. "Not yet," Preston said. "We wait for the right moment. Timing is everything. If he leaves town first." His eyes flicked to the small window, catching the wan light outside. "Then it's a clean cut." Vanessa's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and stiffened, frowning. "It's just checking in. Nothing important." She set it down too fast, and in that motion, a small camera hidden behind the clock caught the movement. "Focus," Preston snapped. "Drew's out of reach for now. Let's go over the insurance again. Beneficiaries, payouts, timing. We can't afford a glitch." They spoke quickly, words clipping together, outlining steps Drew had been forced to imagine but never expected to witness. Each detail, recorded silently by the surveillance devices, layered the evidence like bricks in a wall. Outside, lights flashed briefly, then another, and another. Vanessa froze mid-step. "What?" Before she could finish, the cabin door burst open. Officers swarmed inside, weapons drawn, voices commanding, sharp and precise. "Everyone down. Hands where we can see them." Preston leapt back, startled, knocking over a chair. The hitman reached for his weapon, but two officers were already at his sides, subduing him with controlled efficiency. Vanessa screamed, stumbling backward, hands raised, panic overtaking composure. Drew wasn't there. He had watched it unfold through the hidden feed, calm, collected, every moment exactly as planned. From the moment Malene had briefed him, from the moment the cabin had been wired, he had designed the collapse of this structure like a building engineered to fail, safely, predictably, irreversibly. Officers cuffed Preston, who yelled, "This isn't over. He won't forgive," but no one listened. The words were drowned in the mechanical clicks of cuffs, the shuffle of feet, and the murmur of other agents securing the perimeter. Vanessa's tears streamed freely now. "Drew, please." Inside the cabin, the hidden microphones and cameras had captured everything. The plotting, the deliberations, the casual way they discussed Drew's elimination as if it were a routine transaction. Every word, every gesture, every pause became evidence of intent. Malene Russo and Detective Alvarez entered shortly after the raid, surveying the scene. "Everything we needed," Malene whispered, her hand resting lightly on Drew's laptop bag, now secured on a nearby counter. Outside, Drew exhaled, his reflection in the darkened window perfectly still. He had watched the chaos, the panic, the unraveling of a plot that had been meticulously constructed for months. The officers guided Vanessa and Preston into separate vehicles. The hitman was silent, expression blank, knowing the law had finally caught him. Back at the station, Drew observed from a secure room as interrogations began. Vanessa's face alternated between defiance and hysteria. Preston tried to craft excuses, alibis, explanation for the financial irregularities. But the audio and video recordings were unflinching. They captured everything. The tone of voice, the cadence of plotting, the admissions, the careful instructions. Detective Alvarez played a recording for Vanessa. "Listen to this," he said. Her own words, discussing Drew's planned suicide, reverberated through the small room. She flinched, hiding her face briefly. "Vanessa," Alvarez continued, Did you know that Quentin Doyle was supposed to retrieve documents only? Not to be killed. Her lips trembled. He attacked me. You struck him, Alvarez said calmly. That's true, but it wasn't part of the plan. He wasn't supposed to die. That's the first deviation. Vanessa's eyes widened, shame and panic mingling. I didn't mean second deviation, Alvarez said, playing another segment. The dialogue between Vanessa and Preston revealed attempts to hire a new intermediary after Doyle's death. You and Preston were planning to replace him. You were ready to continue the plot. Vanessa's head dropped. Preston, sitting in another room, muttered under his breath, realization dawning that all his careful lies were now indelibly documented. Financial crimes were revealed next. Transfers to shell companies, offshore accounts, discrepancies in the firm's ledgers, all recorded, all traced. Malene Russo had ensured the data was untouchable, organized, undeniable. Drew watched silently from the secure observation room, expression neutral. The system he had set in motion was working. Every misstep, every revelation, every confession unfolded without his presence, but under his design. The interrogation shifted back to Quentin Doyle. Vanessa's face was pale, her hands trembling. I didn't mean to, he lunged at me. I thought I was defending myself. Detective Alvarez nodded. We understand, but you did kill him, and that, combined with the subsequent plotting, is now on record. Vanessa's lips quivered. I didn't know. You acted, Alvarez continued. And then you conspired to finish what you started. That's the truth. Drew's eyes remained on the monitors. He felt no satisfaction, no vengeance. Only the absolute certainty that the structure, built of lies, deceit, and greed, had collapsed exactly as intended. Preston sat across from another detective, attempting to rationalize the financial crimes. It wasn't meant to. There were adjustments, contingencies. You coordinated payments, concealment, and a murder plot, the officer said. We have records, emails, messages, witnesses. Nothing is missing. Nothing is ambiguous. The hired hitman, who had once been a shadow in their plan, was quietly cooperating after seeing the mountain of evidence. I was only following orders, he said. That's all I know. Orders were criminal, Alvarez said, and they're documented. Vanessa's interrogation circled back to Doyle again. The audio clearly captured her panic, the way she had struck him unexpectedly. She could no longer spin the narrative of a simple break-in. The truth had erupted, undeniable and complete. Drew exhaled softly. He turned away from the monitors, walking to the window overlooking the city at night. The lights twinkled, indifferent, unaware of the precise orchestration of human downfall that had just unfolded. Malene Russo approached, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. It's done, she said. Everything is recorded. Everything is secured. Drew nodded. No improvisation required. Outside the station, officers guided Preston and Vanessa into separate holding cells. Lawyers scrambled, but the evidence was overwhelming: audio, video, documents, financial trails. Drew didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, calm, watching the systems he had designed work with relentless precision. The cabin, the conspiracy, the lies, they had all collapsed under their own weight. Every conversation, every plan, every step toward his elimination had become proof of intent, captured in full clarity. And finally, the truth about Quentin Doyle's death emerged, not as rumor, not as speculation, but as verified fact. He had been a pawn in a meticulously crafted plan, struck prematurely by Vanessa, and his death had triggered the unraveling of everything that followed. Chapter 10, A Quiet Aftermath. The courtroom was silent, except for the occasional scrape of a chair or the distant cough from the back rows. Drew Harmon sat near the front, hands folded calmly in his lap, eyes fixed on the judge as the sentences were read. Vanessa's face was pale and taut, Preston's expression flickering between anger and disbelief, and the hired hitman remained impassive, almost resigned. Vanessa Harmon, the judge said, voice crisp, for your role in the planning, attempted concealment, and execution of criminal activity, including the death of Quentin Doyle, You are sentenced to 25 years in state prison." Vanessa gasped, fingers gripping the edge of the bench. Her lips quivered as if she wanted to argue, to explain, to negotiate, but the words never came. She glanced at Drew for the briefest moment, searching, pleading, maybe blaming, but he didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, composed, unreadable. "Preston Walsh," the judge continued, "for conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and laundering of corporate funds, you are sentenced to 30 years in state prison." Preston's shoulders slumped. For the first time, his carefully cultivated composure faltered. He looked around the courtroom, as if expecting someone to step in and reverse the verdict. But no one did. And the hired associate, the judge said, "For aiding and abetting the criminal plot, you are sentenced to 15 years. The gavel struck. The room jolted with finality. Officers moved quickly, guiding the three to the back of the courtroom. Flashbulbs popped as reporters photographed the scene, capturing the faces of those responsible and the silent figure of Drew Harmon, who had been their target and yet had become untouchable. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp with early spring. Journalists shouted questions, flashing cameras, but Drew walked calmly, unhurried. He avoided the cluster of reporters, focusing only on the car waiting at the curb. "Mr. Harmon," one shouted, "do you feel vindicated?" Drew didn't respond. He did not need to. Vindication, he realized, was irrelevant. Justice had been served, but his satisfaction did not require applause or recognition. Inside the car, Lily waited. She had grown taller over the months, her features softening as she regained a sense of safety. She reached for his hand as he sat beside her. "Dad," she said softly, "it's really over." Drew squeezed her hand, nodding. "Yes, Lily, it's over." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but this time, they were not the fear-induced tremors of a terrified child. They were relief, a release of tension that had built for months. When they returned home, Drew walked through the familiar rooms with a quiet attentiveness. The house bore marks of the past, faint discolorations, traces of chaos, but it was his to reclaim. He opened the windows, letting the spring air fill the space, carrying away stale shadows and heavy memories. "Do you want to help me plant flowers in the garden?" he asked Lily, picking up a pair of gardening gloves. She nodded eagerly. "Yes, Dad." They worked together for hours, turning soil, planting seeds, and laughing over small mistakes, dirt on hands, toppled pots, crooked rows. Drew watched Lily carefully, noting how each smile, each tentative movement, reflected a new chapter in her healing. In the evenings, Drew returned to his architectural studio, not as a man rebuilding his career from nothing, but as one refining it with renewed focus. He poured himself into new projects, designs that reflected both precision and patience, each blueprint a testament to discipline, foresight, and control. A colleague stopped by one evening, curious. "You seem different, Drew. Calmer, more deliberate." Drew smiled faintly. "I've learned that systems, whether in buildings or in life, only function when their foundations are sound. I've spent a long time reinforcing mine." He didn't speak of the months of betrayal, the conspiracies, the surveillance, or the collapse he had orchestrated. Those remained his alone, quiet victories etched into his mind. His revenge had been silent, lawful, and absolute. Lily's room became a sanctuary, her laughter returning to echo along the hallways. Drew encouraged her to express herself, to reclaim the childhood stolen by fear and uncertainty. He attended her school events, her art shows, her small victories in life, offering presents without pressure. One evening, after tucking Lily into bed, Drew lingered in her doorway. She looked up at him, sleepy eyes shining. "Dad," she whispered, "can we just be normal now?" He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes, Lily, we can be normal." He left the room, closing the door gently behind him, and walked to the living room. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Drew stood by the window, staring out at the city lights below. The chaos, the threats, the plots, they were all behind him now. There was no celebration, no triumphal speeches, no public declarations of victory. Drew Harmon did not need them. He had designed consequences as precisely as he designed buildings. Every misstep, every flaw in the plans of those who sought to destroy him had been accounted for. His life was intact. His daughter was safe. The law had done its work, and his enemies were incapacitated. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the desk where he kept his architectural plans. He looked down at them, new projects, fresh designs, unblemished by external interference. Each line, each measurement, represented control, foresight, and patience. Drew Harmon's revenge had not been loud. It had not been visible. It had not been immediate. It had been perfect, quiet, calculated, and complete. He did not feel joy, nor did he feel vengeance. He felt certainty. Months passed, the seasons changing from spring into summer. Lily flourished. Drew's reputation as an architect grew stronger, bolstered by new projects and a renewed sense of purpose. He watched her navigate the world cautiously, carefully, but with increasing confidence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Drew stood on the balcony of his home, a gentle breeze brushing his face. The city stretched out below him, vibrant, unaware of the careful orchestration of justice that had unfolded. He thought of the past months, the betrayals, the threats, the precise collapse of a dangerous plan. And he thought of the future, of Lily, of the life they would continue to build together. No words were necessary. Drew Harmon had survived. He had endured, and he had ensured that justice was served, not with fury, not with rash action, but with absolute precision. In the quiet of the evening, he turned back inside. Lily was asleep. The house was safe. The plans on his desk waited, each a promise of structure, of order, of a future built carefully, deliberately. Drew Harmon was a man who designed consequences as precisely as buildings, and whose revenge, measured and silent, had been flawless, lawful, and absolute.